Hi everyone. Today we start by hearing from a man in Kentucky who captures something on his trail cam at his grandfather's farm that forever keeps him out of the woods. And then on to Wyoming, where a listener answers their front door only to feel like they are living in a horror movie. And finally, we head east to the New Jersey shore, where a listener shares the terrifying experience they have after closing up the beach. Now, be sure to aim for that subscribe button and get yourself a bullseye. Great. Now let's get into the stories. I kind of have an obsession with trail cameras. When I was 10, I asked for one for Christmas, and I was so excited when I got it. I think I've owned a dozen of them over the course of my life, and I'm 35 now. It's really nerdy just how into trail cams I am. I'm the kind of guy that watches reviews on them on YouTube and is keeping up on the latest models. Everyone has their own weird obsession, and mine is trail cameras. I have my trail cam on my grandfather's property. It's about an hour north from where I live. He owns about 100 acres out there, and I've had my cameras all over the property for a long time. I download the cameras and move their positions every couple of weeks. Most people use their trail cams for hunting purposes. They're trying to figure out if they have any big bucks wandering around their area that they can hope to get. I don't really use them like that. I mostly just use them to try and get cool pictures of animals. I actually even have a spreadsheet that I use to keep track of my sightings. At some point, back when I was in high school, I looked up all the possible animals I could catch on my camera. I made a list of them, and I've been tracking them ever since. Raccoons and possum are the most common sighting, but I see a lot of deer too. I thought I was looking at a deer when I caught this one thing on camera. I've had a big old 8-point wandering around for a year or so now. I have a dozen great pictures of it that I show to my buddies. The pictures started from pretty far away. The camera was in night vision mode when this happened, so the pictures are pretty grainy and tinted green. They're also far away, but you can pretty clearly make out these shining eyes and the silhouette of an antler rack against the moon. When I first saw these pictures, I was pretty excited because of the rack. It was absolutely huge. I knew that I had probably never seen this particular buck before, and that made me pretty happy. That's why I put those cameras out. It's to see new animals. I got about a dozen pictures of this thing. My camera takes pictures whenever it senses motion. It seems like the creature was moving towards my camera almost as if it could sense that it was there. And then as it got closer and closer, the image became clearer. I began to realize that it was not a deer at all. For one thing, it seemed to be bipedal, and it was standing on two legs for the most part and would occasionally use its front arms for support, sort of like a gorilla. Also, it was way too tall for a deer. In one image, it's standing like a man, and its rack is probably 8 feet in the air. If that whole deal with it standing on two legs hadn't tipped me off that it wasn't a deer, its head and body certainly would have. Its face was long like a deer. But even in those grainy green trail cam photos, it was apparent that it was like a skull. I wondered if maybe this was some deer with rotting flesh disease. And then its body was weird too. It's like its whole torso was wrapped in some sort of a cage and was extremely thin. In one photo, its body was turned so that it was silhouetted against the moon, and I could almost make out hip bones. And then as I was scrolling through these photos, I was becoming really uneasy. I was sitting in my bedroom, but it felt like something was watching me. And as I looked closer at the photos, a chill ran down my spine. I had to get up and turn on my bedroom light because I felt like something was hiding in the shadows. I think that what really made me feel that way was the creature's eyes. In every single photo, they were bright, way brighter than the normal reflection of light in a raccoon or deer's eyes. I felt like they were looking at me, straight at me, even though I was just looking at pictures. And this feeling honestly made me kind of freak out. I didn't understand what it was, but I felt like I was panicking. The pictures were from miles away, but I felt like this creature was right here in my bedroom, all at the same time. Or maybe just outside my window, staring at me. So that's why I made the really rash decision, and it was really stupid, and I regret it now. I wish I had known that other people had stories of this thing, and maybe I'd have found a way to keep them. But I deleted all the photos. I know it was dumb and impulsive, but it was the only way I could get that feeling to go away. It was like I was being haunted, like some evil spirit was hovering around, and it made me feel terrified and uneasy and like I needed to run and hide. Like those eyes were just staring at me, wanting to rip me apart. If I still had the photos, I certainly would have sent them. I know that this story may seem far-fetched, but it really happened. I've been avoiding going into the woods at night ever since then, just in case. Every time I check my trail cams, I get a pit in my stomach, really, and I'm really worried that I'm going to see that thing again. Part of me wants another picture, but part of me hopes I never see it again. I hope I can just get back to what life was like before I ever saw this thing. My parents own a large ranch out here in Wyoming. On it, they have their own house at one end of the property, and I fixed up and took over an old ranch hand's house on the opposite end, and I live here by myself. The ranch is large enough that neither house is visible to the other, but it's an easy, quick drive over in a car or a ranch vehicle. So it was November when everything happened. I had just finished making some food for a potluck with friends, and I was washing the dishes when I heard this knock on the door. I looked through the glass along the side of the door to see who it was, assuming it would be my mom coming to rant about my father like she often does. But it was two younger kids. They stood right next to each other, looking down towards their feet. One looked to be maybe 13, and he had dark brown hair and pale skin. The other was a young girl with long ponytail braids. She might have been 9 or 10. I opened the main door, but I left the screen door between us shut and locked. I asked them what they were up to, being friendly and approachable because they were just kids. But it did strike me as weird that they were out wandering around so late. It was like 9:30 at night. But I know that some of the neighbors do have rowdy kids, so I was just assuming that that's who these two were. I remember them saying to me, "We got lost. Can we come in and wait for our parents?" Their tone was completely void of emotion, and that sort of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, if they were lost kids, they would sound afraid, right? So I asked them if they called their parents. They said, "Our parents are on the way. Can we come inside?" I was very hesitant to let them in, but I always try to be helpful, so I unlocked the door and let them inside. I mean, they were kids after all. So I gestured for them to have a seat in the living room, and they both walked over. The little one grabbed the older one's hand as they sat down. I asked them where their parents were. If they lived nearby, I thought maybe I could just drive them next door or something if need be. The older one looked at me with a completely emotionless face and said, "Our parents are on the way." I felt sick when I made eye contact with this kid. His eyes were not normal. They were pitch black, in fact, like looking into a deep well that you can't see the bottom of. The hairs on my arms and neck stood up, and I instantly regretted letting them inside. The little one stood up then and asked to use the bathroom. Her eyes were just as dark as the boys. Something was seriously wrong, but I said yes, and I pointed to the bathroom door. Both of them went in together, and I quickly rushed to my phone. I texted my parents so I wouldn't raise any alarm with the kids. Something was very, very wrong, and I didn't want to risk making this any worse. But I got a message back saying that the text message had failed to send. I'd never had any issues with reception on the ranch before, so that was weird. The lights then flickered in my house for a moment, and then the power cut out completely. And then I heard thudding and crashing from inside the bathroom, almost like the kids were knocking things over in the dark. I feel bad for saying this, but I had no desire to help them. I wanted to run away as fast as I could from these creepy kids, actually. I turned the light from my cell phone on and pointed it towards the hallway where the bathroom was, and I nearly fell backwards in shock. Both of the kids were standing there, holding hands just outside the bathroom door, staring at me. "Our parents are here," the boy said, and they both walked right out the door. I peeked through the window and watched them walk off towards the road and get into a car. The lights flickered back on shortly after it pulled away. I then drove over to my parents' house to tell them what had happened, but they had been asleep and didn't notice the power outage. I saw the time on their microwave, though, and it was flashing at 12:05, so I knew that theirs must have gone out, too. I tried to explain it away as a weird coincidence, but I know that there was something supernatural about the situation. After seeing those kids, some of the cattle on the ranch then went missing. My father and I were always careful about locking the barns and pens and making sure every animal was accounted for, so that was unusual. We take excellent care of our animals. They receive regular veterinary care, especially the pregnant moms. And then one of our goats, a pregnant goat who was having a normal and healthy pregnancy, had an entire stillborn litter just weeks before we were expecting her to give birth. Now I've been feeling extra fatigued lately, so I went to the doctor because it was unusual. I'm a healthy 25-year-old who eats well and gets plenty of exercise daily. They couldn't figure out what it was right away, but they're highly considering lupus. I haven't seen or heard from those two since that night, but I do know now that they weren't any of the neighbors' kids. We'd gone to a barbecue down the road since that night, and I asked the neighbors if they knew of or had seen any kids matching that description, and they had never heard of them or seen them. And now, since that experience, I've heard strange tapping sounds on some of my windows, followed by flickering lights and weird disturbances in my electronics. Sometimes I think I see stuff out of the corner of my eyes, but I can't figure out if it's real or just my paranoia. Anyway, hopefully, I'll find a way to get past all of this. When I was 17, I saw something that to this day gives me chills. Ever since I was a child, I loved being in the water. I was on my community swim team since I was 5, which eventually turned into me joining a travel team and competing in the tri-state area around New Jersey. Naturally, when I got to high school, I was excited to join the swim team and continue perfecting my craft. This passion eventually led me to a job as a lifeguard at the local beach, where I got paid to be around or in the water. Could a job really get better than that? Because I wasn't able to work until I finished school and practice for the day, I took the later shift at the beach, meaning the sun would start setting before the end of my shift. When it started getting near sunset, I would start to clear the water and turn off the beach lights, and then finally call it a night. While people technically could sneak back onto the beach after I closed, it typically didn't happen. I mean, there's a certain risk to swimming by yourself, especially at night, so most people were content with just heading home once the sun set. Me, on the other hand, I loved taking a dip after the shift. I was pretty confident in my swimming abilities, and the water at the beach was relatively calm, so it didn't much bother me to be in the ocean by myself, even in the dark, since I didn't wade out too far or anything. So one Friday evening following my shift, when the beach was empty, I found myself floating in the ocean, washing away the stresses of the week. As I floated on my back and looked up at the sky, the stars were abundant, and I remember thinking I'd never quite felt peace like I was feeling in that moment. I was humming to myself as the water lapped my arms, when suddenly something caught my eye. Darting across the sky, then pausing directly above my field of vision, was this tiny, bright green light. At first, I thought it was just a tiny insect hovering above me, maybe a discolored lightning bug who had found itself too far from shore. But reaching up in the air, I became more confident that this thing I was seeing was no bug, but in fact was miles away. Many miles. Maybe a shooting star? Maybe. But whatever it was, it seemed to hover right above me indefinitely, and I thought shooting stars typically fizzled out pretty quickly after they appeared. Suddenly I watched while 5 purple lights shot out from the single green light, and they then formed a circle around the single light and began rotating counterclockwise. The display was hypnotizing, to say the least, but deep in my gut, I started feeling as though something wasn't right. There was no occasion for fireworks or any reason for strobe lights to be dancing in the air. In fact, peering back towards the shore, I could see the beach town was dark, not a person or party in sight. And with this, the mesmerizing lights began to turn rather terrifying to me, because now I was running out of justifications for them. As if in response to my growing fear, the lights stopped circling and suddenly converged into one blindingly bright beam. The beam transformed from green to yellow to white, and a quick look around me had me convinced that it was pointing directly into the water, at me. It's difficult to describe the emotions that overcame me in that moment, but for all the strength I could manage, I knew I needed to get out of the water, and I needed to do it fast. Suddenly the beam began to grow, as if it were coming closer, and instinctively my body sank into the water. Realistically, I know the water wasn't going to protect me from whatever was tracking me, but I did know that the water was cloudy and could give me at least a false sense of security under its haze. I held my breath longer than I had ever done before, and I fought against the little current in a dire effort to make it back to shore. My mind and my body were in conflict with each other. My body wanted to flail as fast as humanly possible, while my mind warned to keep calm and to not create a lot of movement. As I continued swimming, I could see the light from the beam above refracted into the water around me, but it was moving around in what I presumed to be searching motions. It was not shining directly onto me anymore, and whether or not that was thanks to me retreating into the water, I didn't care. I just wanted to remain as shadowed as possible. Finally, when I reached the shallows, I was unable to rely on the water for protection any longer, so I shot out of the ocean and onto the beach as fast as humanly possible, running across the sloshing wet sand. All the while, I was looking up at the beam in the sky, which was now again surrounded by colorful spinning lights, and I began screaming at the top of my lungs for help. My commotion must have been deafening, and as I continued sprinting up the beach, lights in the surrounding beach homes began to flicker on, and silhouettes filled the windows. I was waving frantically, begging anybody for assistance, when finally my legs gave out and I found myself face up in the sand, once more, looking up at the lights. I can't say for sure what happened next, but suddenly the lights converged into themselves once more, but instead of turning into a beam this time, they condensed back into that single green light that I had initially seen, before they went shooting off into the distance and disappearing amongst the stars. In an instant, I was surrounded by people from the beach houses who were wrapping me in towels, carrying me to the safety of their home. They were all panicked. I could see it in their faces, having feared that I had been attacked by a shark or something, and they were asking me if I was hurt. It took me a minute to finally catch my breath, but I told them the truth. Not sure what they thought, but the truth was far more scary to me than the mere threat of a shark attack has ever been. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Donovan Dread, who releases almost every single day. Also, if you like true crime, then check out Donovan Dread True Crime. There are new releases several times a week.